Good day, guys. It's O'Neill Anderson here from Global FX. I just want to quickly rush through or just run through a few important points that I'm looking for in the markets now from a technical point of view as well as from a fundamental point of view, right? Now, the chart that you are seeing here, you're looking at a USDCHF. It's a 4-hourly time frame. I have already sent the technical setup of what I am actually looking for on the USDCHF, as I've highlighted that we are potentially looking at a left shoulder over here, and then we're looking at a head over here, then we're looking at a right shoulder over here, right? And then these 2 points here, these resistance levels here, this one here as well, which has now been broken. So this will be your left neckline and your right neckline, right? So that is a inverted head and shoulder pattern, or inverted head and shoulder. um but before I even get into that, there has been very much there's been an increase in optimism amongst investors and traders, and that is largely driven by geopolitical tensions of two of the world's largest economies. And obviously, I'm speaking about the US and China. Now, what made headlines in this week is that we've seen that China is in- is actually proposing, or rather, they are said to have sanctioned, or they are going to sanction a major US company, which is Lockheed Martin. Now, Lockheed Martin, it's basically a aerospace or a military defense or a US defense company. Now, the way that this creates about political tension or geopolitical tension. If you watched the previous video, I've just quickly highlighted or just briefly discussed the geopolitical tension between the US and China, mainly because of China considering Taiwan as being part of China, or being territory of, or being their territory, whereas Taiwan actually does not consider themselves to be a territory of China, or to be part of China, right? And we've seen that the US has actually been continuously giving assistance or supporting Taiwan. So this obviously creates about political tension or geopolitical tension amongst US and China. Now, I won't actually go through a lot or into much detail, but what we do know is that Beijing considers Taiwan, right, which has never been part of the communist-led People's Republic of China, right? So they consider Taiwan to be, Beijing considers Taiwan to be a breakaway province. Um, Now this year, right, the whole sanctioning of or the whole of China basically sanctioning a US company, Lockheed Martin. This is because of a arms deal that Washington has approved. So they've basically approved Martin or Lockheed Martin to actually supply Taiwan with military artillery and so forth. But the way China views this here is that China views Washington's efforts to basically arm Taiwan. The way they view it is basically they view it as attempts to like undermine Chinese sovereignty and national security, whereas on the other hand, right, Washington recognizes that Beijing has a one China policy, right? So I won't get into much details into that, but we know that Washington continues to support democratic Taiwan and basically help the island defend itself against China. And China is vastly, they are much more bigger and better equipped than what Taiwan is, right? So that is what actually made headlines there. But at this point in time, it's very unclear. It's not clear what kind of effect um, China's action would actually have on Lockheed Martin. But we do know that this does definitely create some political tension amongst the US and China, right? And we've seen over the past weeks and months, the Donald Trump administration has actually been poking holes at China. So obviously, China will use every form of action or leverage that they can to actually make it very clear that they are not pleased with the actions of the US or with regards to the arms deals between the US and or between the US companies per se and Taiwan, right? So that is one thing you want to keep your eye on. So getting back to the technicals, I'll get into the GBPUSD also much later in the video. But what we can see is I have highlighted those or the inverted head and shoulder pattern that or what seems to be an inverted head and shoulder pattern. So what we can see here also we have this area of support right over here. Now I know that a lot of traders were actually they had a short squeeze here, right? Let me just get out my brush tool. So we had a lot of traders already. Before I even get to that, we can see that we have a close below this support, right? But price actually failed to make its way down, right? And this um the way that I consider breaks, right? For me, for a break for me to be valid, right? For me to consider a break to be valid, there's a few things that I look at, or rather one thing that I look at mainly, right? Now, if you look at this candlestick here, you can see you have a huge bear candle here, and this candle closed below this previous support, and we can see that the candle following or after the close of that bear candle, we can see that this candle actually closed bullish. Although it did close below that previous support area, but it is a bull candle, so I wouldn't consider this a break. What I would have considered a break is if you had this huge bear candle close below the support and you had our next candle also close below a support and it should also be a bear candle, that is what I would consider a break. So in this case here, I didn't really consider this a break here, so I wasn't actually short on this here, and I'm not surprised that price did not make its way down here, right? What we can then see what happened after that is price came up, came to retest this area again as support, and we had on a lower time frame, if you look at the rejection here, if you look at the right shoulder there on the lower time frame, you would notice that this is a double bottom reversal pattern. I won't get into much detail regarding that, but what I am currently looking for on the USDCHF, right? If I just take a trend line and I connect the two necklines here, my left and my right neckline, we can see that we have a candle close above this descending trend line here. Now, considering the break, right, we can see you also have this huge bull candle close above this descending trend line. Now, I'm not very confident or comfortable about this break here, and this is very similar to the situation we had here where price failed to make its way down. So what I'm looking for here, I'm looking for a retest of this descending trend line before I can actually get long entries, and my targets will actually be at a psychological level of 0.9500. So that will basically approximately be my profit target. Now I won't just enter at a retest merely because price is at the retest of the descending trend line. There's lots of other stuff that I will take into consideration. I'll be looking at getting price action confirmation mainly before I actually enter a trade. That is just one of my entry rules. Before I enter a trade, I have specific points where I enter a trade, but before I enter a trade, I make sure that I do have price action confirmation, and those could be reversal candlesticks, right? If you are in our private signals network, then you should know what those confirmation candlesticks are. But another thing, whenever I look at my US dollar pairs, I like to look at my DXY as well. Now, your DXY is basically your US dollar currency strength index. It basically just gives you the strength of the dollar relative to a basket of other currencies, right? Um, what we can see here is that we have this descending channel here, right? If I just draw in the descending trend line like that and just copy that over, what we can see that price has been moving in a rather um, consistent structure here, with lower lows and lower highs, and we've had bounces off the bottom of this channel here multiple times, and this also seems to be another bounce off that descending channel there. But a significant price area to consider is this area of previous support, which could serve as resistance here in the future, once price gets up to that level there. Now I'll be using my DXY basically to confirm my long entries, or to confirm my market bias or my bullish bias on the USDCHF. I would love to see a break above this previous level of support and a retest, right, before we can see price actually making its way further up. Or I could simply look at a break of this channel and a retest of that channel, and I can then expect my DXY to continue rising, right? So the reason why is that the DXY is usually the leading indicator, so to speak, when it comes to the US, to your US dollar currency pairs, right? So that is what I'll mainly be looking at. So once, if price is still trading below this level of previous support, which could serve now as resistance, if price is not above that this level here, or this price area here, I highly doubt that I would be in a trade on the US dollar CHF, right? Also largely depending on the fundamental um, factors that will definitely have an impact on the US dollar, right? Now let's just go to the GBPUSD setup that I sent in this week. Now we have seen that, if you recall correctly, I was actually expecting a retest of 1.25, right? We've seen that the market has actually pushed much more higher than, excuse me, we've seen that the market has pushed much more higher than this price area over here. And what I believe is basically what we've seen, that at 8 o'clock in the morning, we've had our CPI economic data come out. And we've seen that figure was higher than expected, or it was higher than the previous figure. I think it was 0.6, if I'm not mistaken. Right, so now your CPI, basically, it's your consumer price index. It just gives you, it basically tries to give you a measure of the change in the prices of goods, of consumer goods and services, right? And those consumer goods and services, there's a whole list of them. But just to mention a few, it includes um, food, beverages, um, housing, it includes transportation, communication. So all those costs are taken into consideration. But what makes up a large reading, or what makes up a large portion of that figure of the CPI reading, is the housing, right? So that, I think it accounts to 43% of the CPI, if I'm not mistaken, right? So I won't get into much detail with regard to the CPI. Um, you just simply have to understand macroeconomics and macroeconomic policies. Now, we are going to have a webinar, right? We haven't decided on the date yet. We'll be just going through a basic introduction to fundamental analysis, mainly focusing on macroeconomics. We won't cover much of geopolitics that much. So if you want to be considered, or if you want to reserve your spot, just send your full names and your contact details to bookings@gforex.co.za. It's bookings@gforex.co.za. It's going to be a free webinar, so we'll just go through that. I just encourage you guys to actually attend, or to register for that webinar if you don't have a very much clear perspective of fundamental analysis. Now remember that just simply looking at your economic calendar and knowing what events are coming out, and just trading or going long or short on trades based off if the reading is positive or negative. That is not fundamental analysis. We'll get into much more detail with regards to fundamental analysis from a macroeconomic perspective. We'll be looking at your fiscal policies, we'll be looking at your monetary policies, and so forth, right? So basically, with the CPI that came out, right, we've seen that um, we've had much more investors actually um, go long on the pound, right? We've seen price actually push up to 1.26, right? Then we had a drop, so we're back at this previous resistance here. So we're testing this level as support. Now, the positive reading on your CPI, right? That just basically it has a positive effect on the pound, mainly because of um, I'm trying to explain it in a way that it won't sound too bombastic for people to understand. But you just need to understand macroeconomics and macroeconomic policies. But if you do have a basic understanding of macroeconomics and macroeconomic policies, then you should know that um, price stabilities, right? Price stabilities of your consumer goods and services. That's what mainly controls your inflation, so to speak, right? So if inflation is very low, the buying power of consumers, so consumers will have much more buying power, right? Because of resulting or due to the low inflation. And if inflation rates are low, obviously people will start to spend more, right? Just to now, if people are actually spending more, that's simply because of the price of goods and services that are relatively cheaper. So the purchasing power of um, a currency of a particular economy, it's much more, there's an increased purchasing power, right, amongst consumers. Now, what usually happens if you have a, if inflation is very low, right? So for governments, what the aim of monetary policies and so forth is basically to have a balanced price, consumer price index per se, right? It's not exactly consumer price index, but just to have a stability in consumer um, or to have a stability in prices of consumer goods and services, right? Usually, if you have a increased inflation, you see governments decreasing interest rates. So it's always the opposite, right? Inflation is up, interest rates. What normally happens is interest rates actually decrease just to get inflation to a certain um, target inflation rate, which is usually around 2%. I think I did mention this in a previous video, right? But if you want to have a basic understanding of fundamentals of macroeconomic policy, then I do suggest that you do actually email your full name, all right, your name and your surname, as well as your contact details to bookings@gforex.co.za, and you will hear from us. We'll send emails to everyone that has actually RSVP'd, and you'll then get a date of when we have scheduled the webinar for, right? So that is basically what I have to say with regards to the GBPUSD as well as the USDCHF. And we've just briefly touched on the geopolitics or the fundamental perspective or your analysis from a fundamental point of view. So I hope this helps a few of you guys. If I've helped one or two people, then I'm basically satisfied by that. So please, guys, just send your names, reserve your spots, and I'll see you.